the piece of the morning. The FBI task force had been disbanded, but the files remained open in a dusty corner of the Chicago field office. There were copycats now, the balaclava boy in Ohio, the blue-eyed bandit in Michigan, but none of them had the precision, the tactical patience of the original. He had become a folk hero to the depraved, a blueprint for the professional who knew when to walk away. The $50,000 reward sat in an interest-bearing account, growing larger every year, a monument to a failure that the Bureau couldn't quite forget. Chapter 25. The New Frontier. The sun began to set over the Rockies, casting long, purple shadows across the landscape of a country that was increasingly made of code. In a data center deep beneath a mountain, servers hummed with the collective identities of 300 million people. The mailbox brigade was a relic of the past. The new thieves didn't need to leave their basements to steal 1,000 lives. They used phishing kits, ransomware, and deep-fake technology to forge identities that were more real than the originals. Michael Schreckingist, now an old man in a prison library, looked at a magazine article about the rise of AI fraud. He smiled, a toothless, yellowed grin. They're doing it with light now, he whispered to himself. I did it with ink. But the heart is the same. It's the greed. It's the thrill of being someone you're not. The war on identity theft had reached the digital Rubicon. There were no more paper shadows. There were only the shadows of the machine. And in that vast, interconnected darkness, the ghosts were multiplying. Chapter 26. The Architecture of Memory. Virginia Dissette's house was no longer her sanctuary. It was a museum of a life that had been fractured. Every time a letter arrived in the mail, her heart skipped a beat. She would examine the envelope, checking for the slightest hint of tampering. It's just a bill, Ginny, her husband would say, his voice weary with the strain of living with a ghost. But Virginia knew better. She knew that behind every bill was a potential identity, a shadow waiting to be cast. She had spent the last 5 years in a state of hypervigilance, a soldier in a war that had no end. The arrest record was still there, a digital scar that refused to heal. She began to volunteer for a local victim advocacy group, helping others navigate the labyrinthine systems of credit bureaus and police departments. She saw the same look in their eyes, the look of someone who had been erased. They don't just take your money, she would tell them. They take your peace. They take the story of who you are and rewrite it in someone else's handwriting. She was no longer the woman who had been pulled over on that Saturday afternoon. She was something else, a survivor, a watchdog, a woman who knew that the only way to keep her name was to fight for it every single day. Chapter 27. The Ghost in the Cell. Michael Schreckingist spent his days in the prison library, surrounded by the scent of old paper and the hum of fluorescent lights. He had become a mentor of sorts to the younger inmates, teaching them the art of the social engineer. It's not about the code, he would tell them, his voice a raspy whisper. It's about the person. Find the crack in the door, and the person will open it for you. He watched the news, following the rise of AI and the way it was being used to create perfect deep fakes. He felt a strange sense of pride, as if he were the grandfather of this new, digital age of fraud. He had been the pioneer of the paper shadow, and now the world was made of nothing but shadows. But at night, in the silence of his cell, he thought about the Harley. He thought about the roar of the engine and the way the wind felt on his face. He realized that the only thing he had ever truly stolen was his own time. He had traded his life for a series of high-quality prints and a chemical high that had long since faded. He was a ghost in a cell, a man whose identity was now nothing more than a series of numbers in a state database. He had spent his life becoming other people, and in the end, he had lost himself entirely. Chapter 28. The Watchdog's Vigil. Anita Jan sat in a high-rise office in downtown Denver, looking out over the mountains. She was now a senior consultant for ID Watchdog, the company that had helped her reclaim her life. She spent her days analyzing the latest trends in identity theft phishing scams, data breaches, and the way social media was being used to harvest personal information. She was the one who designed the training programs for bank tellers and corporate security officers. We have to be faster than the thieves, she would tell her team. We have to anticipate their next move before they even make it. She thought about Kimberly Merritt often. She thought about the hollow stare and the way Merritt had been a collection of stolen fragments. She realized that the only way to stop the thieves was to take away their power, the power of the shadow. She became a vocal advocate for stronger privacy laws and better data protection. She was the one who testified before Congress, urging them to take the threat of identity theft seriously. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior, a watchdog who refused to blink. Chapter 29. The Curator's Last Stand. The trial of the curator was a spectacle of international proportions. It was held in a high-security courtroom in Zurich, a city known for its discretion and its wealth. The defense argued that the paintings weren't stolen, but liberated. They claimed that the curator was simply ensuring that these masterpieces were preserved in the hands of those who truly appreciated them. Art belongs to the world, the defense attorney argued, not to a warehouse in Chicago. But Marcus Thorne wasn't buying it. He stood on the witness stand, presenting the forged manifests and the dummy shipping records. He showed the jury how the curator had used identity theft to move the paintings across borders. This wasn't about art, Thorne said, his voice cold. This was about greed. This was about men who thought they were above the law. Men who thought they could own the soul of a culture. The curator was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in a Swiss prison. But Thorne knew that the battle wasn't over. The buyers were still out there, sitting in their private bunkers, looking at their stolen Monets and Dutch landscapes. The provenance was still broken, and the paper shadows were still long. Chapter 30, The Eternal Shadow. Somewhere in a quiet neighborhood in the Chicago suburbs, a man is raking leaves. He is a man of a certain age, with a steady hand and a quiet demeanor. He is the kind of neighbor you can always rely on to keep an eye on your house while you're away. He looks at the sunset, the sky a deep, bruised purple.